The beautiful lessons in the art of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. With the rise of the UFC, the art of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, aka BJJ, has been spreading fast over the past few years. My personal BJJ journey started a little over 2 years ago. I've slowly found myself becoming more and more immersed in its beauty. This is for a few reasons. 1. BJJ is one of the most effective in one-on-one hand-to-hand combat. 2. The struggle of a live sparring session, aka rolling, introduces challenges that are a microcosm of life. 3. The team of training partners is a strong support group. 4. It encourages everyone involved to overcome difficult challenges. Below, I'll go into the details of the valuable life lessons I've learned on my journey, along with a historical background of BJJ as I understand it. Historic overview. Jiu-jitsu is a Japanese word that it is said means the gentle art. That's not exactly the impression you'd get from people practicing the sport, though. For an outsider, the moves seem violent. They can be, but the gentleness of the art comes from the idea that nothing should be forced through brute strength. It's about flowing with what an opponent gives you. Jiu-jitsu is a martial art that originated in Japan, something that we call Japanese Jiu-jitsu today. In its origins, Japanese Jiu-jitsu incorporated standing and ground techniques. Today, Japanese Jiu-jitsu has been split into Brazilian Jiu-jitsu, which is for the most part based on the ground, and Judo, which is for the most part a standing martial art. The origin of Brazilian Jiu-jitsu came from a Japanese immigrant to Brazil known as Mitsuyo Maeda. He was one of the first known MMA fighters in history. He transferred his knowledge of what is now known as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to the Gracie family. The Gracie family are now known as the propagators of the art of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The Gracies. It all started with the brothers Helio Gracie and Carlos Gracie Sr. Carlos Sr. is known as the Gracie who had the vision to spread Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu across the world. His younger brother Helio is the Gracie who is most widely known since he is said to have been the one to execute Carlos's vision. These days, the Gracie legacy is a bit split. Two camps have developed over the years. There are those who see BJJ as a sport and train with the intent of competing in BJJ tournaments. Then there are those who see BJJ as a self-defense system and strictly practice to defend in a real fight. This self-defense camp also sometimes refers to the art as Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. The sports camp is attributed to Carlos Gracie Sr. and his son Carlos Gracie Jr., whereas the self-defense camp is attributed to Helio Gracie and his lineage. The UFC revolution. Helio and his lineage left a mark on the MMA world by demonstrating the strength of Jiu-Jitsu in UFC 1. By intentionally sending the smallest member of the family, Royce Gracie, and defeating every fighter in the first UFC, the Jiu-Jitsu message was sent around the world. Meanwhile, in the BJJ circuits, the Carlos Sr. lineage has dominated the scene. These days, the sport of BJJ is evolving, and new innovators are coming to the forefront, whereas in the self-defense Jiu-Jitsu, most of the fundamental tenets have not been changed. An effort is now being made by some to unify these two systems in order to have a common rule set that works as a sport and lends itself to self-defense. Modern MMA has utilized the sport jiu-jitsu knowledge to slowly develop a third type of jiu-jitsu that works in sanctioned and time-limited MMA fights, where art, sport, and self-defense meet. BJJ is known as a martial art. However, as its popularity has grown, the art aspect has been drowned out by the sport and self-defense aspects. The sport and self-defense are evident in BJJ. The art is in understanding the essence of this martial art. The name of the game is exert the least resistance necessary to control and submit an opponent. Quote, if you think, you are late. If you are late, you use strength. When you use strength, you tire, and if you tire, you die. Saulo Ribeiro. In essence, the goal is to use what an opponent gives you against them. The exploration of this art leads to various different innovations in both the sport and self-defense sides of the martial art. There's also an aspect of innovation that comes with continuous trial and error. By being forced to problem solve, our creativity comes through to help us. Just like in any other undertaking, one of the steps towards mastery is repetition. In the beginning, Our actions are an attempt to mirror the actions of masters. We then move on to a repetition that is an exploration. Trying various different variations, we move closer to our own unique style. Once we reach an acceptable proficiency in the basics, we can begin to innovate. These 3 steps of mirroring, exploring, and innovating apply to anything, whether that's painting, piano, archery, etc. In the case of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, the exploration of these 3 steps feeds a competence in self-defense and intense competitive sport. What Jiu Jitsu teaches about persistence. To undertake the journey of mastery, we have to make a vow to walk a long and arduous path. BJJ adds the element of rough training. So not only is failure inevitable, failure can be painful. Choosing to continue despite the physical stress teaches a level of discipline. The love for the practice needs to exceed the difficulty of the training. Again, this applies to anything we do. BJJ is special in that it helps us to come to realize that we can become competent in anything we choose to. Regardless of how much progress we've made in anything, we need to wake up every day and revel in the one and only true wisdom, which is that we know nothing. The underlying wisdom is, anything we practice with unrelenting persistence, we will get better at. What Jiu Jitsu teaches about decision making. The beginning of the BJJ journey can fool us with false positives and false negatives. Sometimes we feel like we're doing worse than we actually are. Sometimes we get fooled into feeling like we're doing much better than we actually are. Usually, this results from our confusion about the goal of training. As mentioned earlier, training should be about the technique. Part of the challenge is that when faced with pressure, we forget what we learn and revert to frantic and explosive reactions. This is true in life as well. Difficult situations reveal who we really are and how well we've worked on improving ourselves. Calm and technical will always beat panicked and frantic, both in BJJ and in life. The underlying wisdom here is stay calm, cool, collected, and apply knowledge instead of reactive impulses. What Jiu Jitsu teaches about flow. There are parallels between the art of BJJ and everyday self-improvement. The ups and downs of Jiu Jitsu journey teaches us a lot about ourselves. This is true about any challenging situation that we have to confront in life. However, Jiu Jitsu has a way of teaching these lessons very clearly in a much shorter time. As was mentioned before, the name of the game is exert the least resistance necessary to control and submit an opponent. This tenet goes beyond just the Jiu Jitsu mats. This is true about life as well, and it's something I've written about even before starting my BJJ journey. The underlying wisdom is, we should not resist what life offers us, but instead, we should learn to harness the situations we find ourselves in for the betterment of the whole. What Jiu Jitsu teaches about dominance. When we start a BJJ training regimen, we're lured into an intense battle of exertion. We tend to feel like if we don't get submissions, we're not progressing. While the submission is important, it's more about training our technique to improve our control of an opponent and improve the chances of reaching a submission. What we don't want is the false sense of confidence that we get from exerting our strength, speed, or agility. If the purpose is to learn about BJJ, then we must make it about BJJ. Don't be afraid to try new things. That's the only way to learn and grow. Stay grounded and maintain a beginner's growth mindset. The underlying wisdom is, let go of any notion of dominance when practicing anything. Strengthening the warrior. As I had mentioned above, with the rise of the sport and self-defense aspects of BJJ, the martial art essence has been watered down. These martial arts traditions originate from very similar Eastern starting points. They have implanted within them warrior wisdom that has informed many generations of fighters. Fighters don't have to be limited to those that fight physically. In a way, we're all fighters every day that we face challenges in life. It's important to remember the purpose of the things that we do. The purpose is what reminds us how we shall improve and helps us to see wisdom where it reveals itself to us. If we're in love with the purpose, we can push through the difficult times that we go through and find ourselves transformed on the other side. It's all about the overall perspective as we progress. The Jiu Jitsu journey is a beautiful and rewarding one. Its benefits lend themselves to every aspect of life. I'm loving the ride, and I hope that if you read this, you'll be inspired to start the journey also. Thank you for reading this article. If you enjoyed it, you can find more like it at www.banafit.com. That's www.banafit.com.